This won't be a budgeting video. It's just a video where I talk about things that I would love that somebody else would have said to me or discussed with me before I live alone as an expat. I was having this moment of working with myself, journaling a little bit, and thinking about my life generally. And I thought that something that's very important in my life, it has been and has changed the way it was important for me during my time as an expat is money. Before coming to Germany, I was used to having a cope system. Even though I was living alone in Tirana for 1 year, I mean, not alone, but not at home with my parents, but with two girlfriends, still was used to having a support system, even though I could actually afford my rent in my shared apartment. I could afford my everyday life, the things that I wanted to buy for myself. I still had my parents always there for me. So the first example of this was that Tirana and Durrës are two cities which are very close to each other, just 30 kilometers far, so it's like 30 minutes to 40 drive, it depends on the traffic jam. And my parents, every week, they were meal prepping. Usually I was staying in Tirana for 5 days, and the weekends I was going back home. So basically the food was completely covered by my parents. Of course, if I had an issue, I would call them and they would show up immediately in my apartment. For example, once I had an issue with my bed, so the bed got broken, and my dad is handyman, so he fixes everything. He fixes like he can do anything in household, and I called him and he came and fixed it. Even though I was always and forever being labeled as being bad with money. Okay, I have been sometimes a bit irresponsible, but I think that the problem was not that I was irresponsible with money, or I mean, I love spending money, but that's another topic. But in this case, I would say that I was not fully responsible yet of everything that might go south in my life. I would never think that I need to bear something, an issue in my apartment alone. And to be honest, I think that that's totally fine, even though at some point I still think that you need to gain or somebody needs to gain their independence. I still think that at that time, when I was 22, it was perfect. I was living in this pink bubble of not having to really budget everything or take care very cautiously on what spendings I was doing. I chose with my full consciousness to come and live in Germany. Which this means that I wouldn't have a support system. I would have to fix everything by myself. I needed to have a amount which was my safety net. I mean, I found out all of this out later on. I didn't think this at the beginning, but I really naively stepped into this new world where I immediately moved from maybe still a princess at her home to a fully grown adult. And to be honest, I was so naive that I did not even research how much should I request as my salary in Munich, how much I would need to spend monthly, and I had to research everything kind of in detail when I already had accepted the offer. And I don't blame anybody except myself, because I had internet, I had access to every platform possible, but I don't know, I think that my brain was not yet adjusted to the fact that Actually, you can find this information online, so other people have done this before you. So I kind of knew that there would be some costs, like maybe a hotel till I find an apartment, the caution, the deposit, of course, like food and so on, but not to really calculate and prepare myself on what was coming. Now can understand what I didn't know back then, because back then I didn't know what I didn't know. My goal when I came here was that I wanted to live alone. I didn't want to share the apartment, and I was really responsible, and I knew that whatever that would cost me, that would be my first priority. So I don't want to save money on housing, but I want to save my mental peace. And since I knew that this transition, at least something I knew in all this situation, I knew that this transition would be difficult emotionally for me. I didn't want to push myself more to handle my transition, my life, to also handle relationship with the people who you would share the apartment with. But you know what? I guess everybody goes through these thoughts. Maybe some people are better prepared than me. Something that really I think was also from the stuff I wasn't prepared for, made the process of spending money a bit more difficult in Germany as soon as I arrived. And this was a mistake I did. But except from the mistake of not researching beforehand what would be my first expenses and how much should I request from my back then employer, which at the end of the day was pretty fair. The second mistake I did, and which made my the spending of money here in Germany much more difficult for me, and I will explain it soon. What does this mean? Was that I was comparing every price to the Albanian one. For example, I would go and drink a beer, and it would cost 4 euros, and in Albania a beer would cost €1.50 maximum, two. And to me, that was a huge difference, because this would mean that everyday life would be much more expensive. But also, I was used to having my nails done every month, and from going from like 12 euros to here in Germany, like the most basic gel polish would cost 30 euros, and 12 euros or maybe 15 max I would have full design on, to 30 euros was like, oh my god, what can I do here? And I started cutting off, doing my nails. I had back then dyed hair, and I let my roots out, because since I was in Albania, because I knew that hairdresser costs would be super expensive here, and many other things which I decided that it was not worth it to pay for here. As I said, every time I had to translate, so basically every day I had to translate prices from euros to lek, or let's say how much this would be in Albania. It really made me feel like, oh no, that's super expensive. I mean, mostly on the services side and food on restaurants, because supermarket and clothes, I supermarket was much more cheaper than Albania, and also clothes I couldn't stop buying. Actually, the constant comparison made me feel a bit like I am in a bad position and I should not spend, and yeah, it made it much more difficult, and it made me feel poorer than I actually was. As I said, till that moment when I came to Germany, I didn't think that, or did not understand how much responsibility the money could carry, because now I didn't have a safety net. I had it if I wanted to, but what's the point if I would work here and still ask for help from my parents in Albania? To my brain, okay, I have this amount of money, but now it's only you and nobody else. So at the beginning, it was much more easy for me to save more money because it was Corona time and we couldn't go out. I couldn't go to cafes. I didn't have a lot of friends, so saving was easy. But to be honest, I did not really understand what I was saving and how. It just happened naturally because I didn't have where to spend the money. But also, I think I could have saved more if I didn't go 5 times in Albania on the first year that I lived in Germany. But yeah, I had a real misconception about money because apparently all my life I was very well supported. I am very grateful for this. But it was not a good preparation of me becoming an adult because I never thought that on the background there are things that might happen, could happen that you need to solve with money. Or you need to be a handyman like my dad, but that's not the case. On the other side, I used money as my mental health support. So when I was not feeling good, lonely, I was going to the shop, spending money. And the contrast between for example, things, so cosmetics, makeup, clothes, and so on, to me here were much less expensive. And in comparison to services, hair, manicure, and restaurants, they were not so expensive. So I was spending all my money in buying online, buying in the shops. And now that I think about it, I don't think that it was just because I was having more access to things I like rather than in Albania, because in Albania back then was much more limited than now. All the selection of the products that you could buy, and you needed to travel outside of Albania so you could buy things you would like. So it was not just that, because yes, of course, from no access to access, you just become a bit impulsive spender. But in my case, I think that the impulsive spending happened also because it was an emotional support. Every time I was feeling lonely and bad emotionally, I knew I could get my dopamine spikes through buying things. And that's how most of my first year went. I was buying crazily. To be honest, I don't judge the version of me back then, because younger era was trying to survive. And every time I hear this discussion with friends and so on, that I spent this amount of money for something that maybe you would think it's crazy, I totally understand because I was also there. And yeah, money solved some of my emotional issues. But from this stage, it took me some years till lately to really come into my full understanding and making sense that money is not just to make you feel good and have a better life, but it's also your support system. So that you need to have this a specific amount of money as safety pillow, so whatever happens, you can solve your problems, you can survive some months without any income. But this took a lot of time for me to think. And especially in this case, I would say I didn't become stricter with the money, but I became more aware of consumerism, more aware of where I want to spend the money, how I want to spend the money. But as I said, I'm not perfect. I still have goals that I would like to achieve. I would like to start investing instead of only saving. I don't know why I haven't done till now. To be honest, I usually miscalculate. I have issues with planning every month or every time I have a new entry in my spendings list. And I still think that I have done a lot of progress to who I am and what's my relationship with money. But there is a lot of work to be done, and I'm still working on it. I value that at some point of time I had a difficult relationship with money, because if I wouldn't, I think I would never learn. And money for me at some point felt heavier, and a burden, in the sense that in all these emotional nuances that money carries, I am so happy that now it's not that guilt around spending it, and how I consider everything and what's happening in Germany. I guess I started getting used to it. I still don't do my nails, but that's another topic. But, anyways, I wanted to talk about this because it took me a bit of time, like 6 years of living alone, to realize that it's not about the money, but it's more than that. So, if you felt at any time heavy, guilty, or you had issues with living life because you didn't have a good relationship with money, you are not alone. And here's somebody who has gone through that as well. Let me know about your journey if you want to in the comments below. See you soon, and this month will be about money as an expat. So I will be really happy if you would tune in.